Thank you very much, Emilia. It's been really a very, very interesting discussion so far. I'm sorry we missed more information from our colleague in Ghana, but and also it would have been good to hear more from Caroline, because WIGO has been doing so much interesting work at the moment. So I really invite everybody to go and check out what they've been doing. What's been really interesting for me, and I might be repeating some of the comments that have been done before, but it is the revelation again, or showing again, how much of the current COVID-19 responses or guidelines around hand washing, social distancing, etc., are just impossible to implement in many contexts, and especially in context of informality because of lack of basic infrastructure, high densities, but also, as Caroline highlighted, because they're problematic, highly problematic for those who are whose livelihoods depend on being in the city, inhabiting the city in all its interstices, in all its little places, being on the streets, selling in the markets, on pavements, those who are feeding our cities, facilitating transportation, who are cleaning, recycling, caring for us, basically. And so it's really important to think about alternatives and to go beyond these blanket measures that are still prevalent in many parts of the world. What's interesting about this platform, of course, is not just that they help identify the difficulties and the sticky points, is also that they're helping to highlight some of the positive responses to the crisis. So we've heard some that were really interesting. It was very interesting to hear what the mayor of Banjul had to say around the early responses, working in collaboration with communities, with particular groups of women, with community leaders, religious leaders. Also very interesting to hear again, it's important to bring that to the fore, the fact that community groups themselves are coming up with incredibly elaborate, detailed, nuanced responses which need to be brought to the fore, which need to be fostered. So this is a really important, and I think what's important about a platform like this is putting light, if you want, on these alternatives or these positive response is critical, not just for now, for addressing the crisis, but also because it helps us to envisage what might come next, right? We've been talking about a better, not just a return to normality, but a return to something better. And the two, I think, are intimately related, because we can only envisage ways out of the crisis that are transformative, that really address these long-term structural issues, if we are reading the current crisis as something which, if we're connecting the dot, if we are linking the current repercussion of the crisis to something which is more underlying structural causes, structural vulnerabilities. And I think that's where this kind of discussions are really important. So 2 points, I think, where they're very important. And maybe where we can try and push. One is offering a moment of reflection where we're reframing the crisis around and putting to the fore these underlying causes. I mean, we've heard a lot this notion of, in particular here, how the informality is not just something that is outside, that is invisible, that shouldn't be there, that is going to be overcome, but actually it is constitutive of our cities. And the responses to the crisis need to take that constitutivity, if we can say that word, as a reality. And it means also, not only do we need to see that informality is constitutive to the city, but it's constitutive to the city in a way that is highly unequal across many layers of inequality. And I think some of the inputs today have helped us understand what are some of these layers. They have to do with with gender, for instance. Some of your colleagues mentioned earlier on vulnerable groups like refugees, etc. People who have different kinds of rights, or people who are in the informal economy who simply his jobs are not recognized. So putting this issue of recognition of the informal economy and informal settlements at the core of the city is key. Putting back on the agenda issues of redistribution. We've heard it a lot today, which is really interesting from various mayors and various participants. Redistribution of basic water, sanitation, housing, infrastructure, health provision, education. We didn't hear green spaces, but I know that in northern context, it is an issue that is being debated a lot, and certainly is also relevant for southern context. Also the issue of bringing in packages to support lost wages. also importantly to take a gendered, as I said, diversity lens. Now, it's really important to, I know, Emilia, you said that we are speaking to the converted in a way, like we're all in agreement, but it's okay that we should reinforce that. And maybe what we should do rather is try to see how can we bring in more people into this conversation, because let's not forget that there is a very strong concurrent push at the moment to use this moment of crisis as a moment of exceptionalism, but that the exceptionalism can become the norm. So deregulations of labor standards, environmental standards, undoing some of these careful, which normally take a lot of time, these careful engagement between communities and local government, which can be very easily swiped off in a moment of crisis. So it is really important that there is platforms like these to reinforce this reading of the crisis. Secondly, what's really interesting here is this talk of collaborative, that we can only find solutions through collaborative responses. And this is really important given the crisis that we're dealing with. And I think the webinars give us a very interesting approach in the ways in which we could be dealing with that, because we are here on the same platform at the same level. We have mayors, we have had a minister, we have representative of informal community groups. And whilst there has been these kinds of practices in many of the fora, like World Urban Forums, like many of the UN Habitat organizations, the fact that these webinars are taking place in a very close proximity, maybe it is about also to do with the technology that everybody is arriving, has the same time, is at the same, arriving on the same moment. There's something very refreshing about that. And I think something that we might want to think about for long-term sort of building on these approaches. And just to finish that, maybe on this point, is how can we try and stretch the experiences that we have in the webinars for thinking different kinds of governance and different kinds of approaches to dealing with informality in the future. Maybe thinking about inviting more people around the table, a diversity of actors around the table. I heard some of the speakers today speak, for instance, about the private sector. Some talked about religious leaders. We need to understand where and how, who are the people that have weight and how do we bring them into this conversation. And perhaps also the story of bringing these kinds of webinar debates into local levels, that they can become a model for thinking through collaborative platforms at citywide level. So thank you very much for the very interesting discussions.